Hi, my name is Whitney Willis, and I'm currently a ninth grade environmental science teacher, as well as a 10th and 11th grade physical science teacher. And so here I'm just kind of just going over through with specific STEM safety mandates by the state of Georgia, as well as some nitpicks about the history and like how we implement that in our schools. And so this is just like a framework of like what kind of to expect in the coming slides about the legal requirements, comprehensive coverage, as well as the accountability system that we have in the state of Georgia. Of course, legal requirements is kind of directly from or pulled from public health companies, communities, organizations, things of that nature, such as OSHA. And they're really good with making sure we have PPT or PPE, all the equipment, goggles, gloves, lab coats, and things of that nature that they actually practice in the laboratory environment once students get out into the workforce. And so we just kind of like mimic that and show them in advance what they're expected to have on or what they're expected to see once they get out into the workforce. And so that's kind of like why Georgia closely aligns their mandates or their policies aligned with public health organizations because it's just to prepare students early for what they're expecting to see. And this slide just kind of shows what that kind of looks like. And I can go further into detail once we get to those slides. But this is just a framework. This is just like what to expect. Okay, so for the state of Georgia, they require us to have a designated COH, which is just a chemical hygiene officer. And they kind of like go or come from like the state, come to this school or come to our schools to go to like different schools and kind of like provide us with a plan of how they want things to go in our school or in our labs specifically, such as implementing a chemical hygiene plan. What are we doing with chemical waste once we're done with the procedure that we're doing for that particular class, right? Things of that nature, as well as conducting regular safety inspections. So what that kind of looks like is coming by maybe like say once a month, seeing how we're keeping upkeep of our lab. Are things placed in the right order? Are they placed in the right areas? Are they disposed of correctly? Do we have containers like biohazard containers in the corner? Um, it's kind of rare, but I worked in healthcare. Are we ever using needles? Do they know where to place the needles? Things of that nature. Are everything or is everything labeled the way it needs to be so it can be easily recognized by students as well as the instructor? As well as maintaining a current safety data sheet, just kind of explaining or describing or demonstrating how well we are doing throughout the year with our current safety measures. And of course, training staff on proper chemical handling. So we are designated to have meetings or professional meetings with science coordinators and like COHs, CHOs, excuse me, to kind of prepare us on how to properly handle certain things and what kind of like to expect in the laboratory. And I learned a lot of this when I was working in the healthcare field, working in a nursing home as well as detention centers as a dental assistant. But a really great thing that I kind of learned was never to pour um, acid in water. I'm sorry, I think it's water and acid. Never pour water inside of acid because it's a really big explosion. So that's just kind of things that like we all need upkeep on and kind of like maintain. So that's what these training meetings or PLs are for, professional learning or meetings are for, is to keep us upkept on this information so we don't forget it as well as it's like fresh in our minds so that we can continue on with the next classes. So these are specific safety protocols for the major core classes that we kind of like interact with. And so chemistry is closely aligned with physical science as well as biology is closely aligned with like environmental science, what I'm teaching. Physics, they have their out branching classes, but for chemistry, which is physical science, I'm looking a lot about using elements. How are we going to interact with elements and how we can incorporate that in the lab? Now, on the periodic table, we have a lot of elements. For example, group one, alkaline metals, they're extremely reactive, right? They cannot do anything with those type of elements on a flat surface. They have to go under the fume hood and test whatever we're testing for that lab underneath the fume hood. And so that's really important as a protocol by the state of Georgia to do anything related to like any fumes, reactivity under the fume hood, as well as making sure that the students know where the eye wash station and safety showers are within the laboratory and how to use it if need be in emergency. Also, where the fire extinguisher is and chemical splash goggles, where are they located, any extras, as well as to have them on at every single lab class. As we move on to biology, it's the same, similar things, but we kind of like look or dissect more so into specific specimens. So, for example, cutting open a frog or cutting open a cat, dissecting a cat. How are we going to dispose of those instruments professionally and like, safely? So that's when we kind of look into the biosafety plans for specimen autoclave protocols, such as sterilizing these instruments once we're done with those biohazard waste containers. So like the bins, how are we disposing of these animals? How are we disposing of the extra pieces that we're cutting off, as well as proper dissecting equipment and hand washing stations. So they're just going over how to go, how to plan for all of these steps in the laboratory, the students as well as instructors. And I really don't do too much with physics. I kind of deal with mostly chemistry and biology because I'm teaching the prelude of those courses. So we're not going to get too much into physics because I am not too familiar with physics. And at my school, we don't really do labs for physics. So it's not really a big thing, but it was really important to like note that in my presentation because that is what I saw in my sources. And my sources are at the bottom. Same thing for 3D printing. We don't really use 3D printing as normal, but I did see that it was a really big important thing for the state of Georgia. I guess a lot of schools have 3D printing, I guess, for physics or any type of engineering program. And so a really big thing that I did notice was a ventilation system. And that's kind of like why it's at the top because who knew that like plastic had these type of really big harmful or bad fumes or like cancerous materials that could infect or affect students' health. And so that was pretty cool to learn about. And so that's all I want to really talk about with that. Also required eye prediction when operating or using any of these printing machinery. But it kind of blew my mind that they need a ventilation system to remove particles from this printing machine. Like I said, we don't really have a specific engineering program. We're not really an engineering program. We're like a bio type of school, magnet school. And so we don't really use a lot of engineering prototypes and things of that nature. But I'm sure if there was a physical kind of physics magnet school, and they'll use these type of printing safety measurements. Now, Georgia documentation requirements are extremely critical, kind of pointing out accountability when providing legal protections for schools or on the behalf of the schools as well as the teachers. And so these records kind of serve as evidence of what we're doing in regards to safety training and protocol implementation in the schools. And so that can go for the teacher as well as the students. How are we all handling or moving around together in this environment safely? And so they kind of like provide us with a safety audit, which is integrated within our school system. And that's kind of like done every year. Just so what we've done, how does that look like? Um, and what type of materials that we use. So teacher training requirements is very important for new teachers to like do an onboarding process. And it's just kind of like it's just a comprehensive training of everything that is required of us. And I recently went over this when I did my new te teacher orientation. And so it just was like simulations basically of like what not to do and what to do in the lab with the other science teachers. More specifically, the hazard awareness, what to do if something happened to one of the students, how do we report that, what to do in specific times and each time limits, as well as having a certification completed at the end of that certificate or at the end of that onboarding process. And so I do have my certification in safety laboratory safety, but chemical handling, I still need to get that. And I'll just have to talk to my science leads on that to be in accordance with the state of Georgia. Um, Kind of like professional development. Like I said, we do have a lot of PL or professional learning just to keep us up to date with things that are like needed to happen in the class. And a really big thing, of course, is annual refresher training, which I spoke about earlier about the acid mixing water or water mixing acid. That's a really big thing, as well as general safety, which is like safety drills, fire drills, things of that nature, what to do in that type of predicament. So a couple strengths and weaknesses that I kind of like pointed out as I was reading is, of course, the strength is comprehensive coverage. We do have a lot of planning done for the school or for our district. And so it's just kind of like compressing all of this knowledge that we have previously. However, a weakness is that the resources are very limited for my county. And it kind of go hand in hand with enforcement. This is the beginning of the year and this is my first year, but I am kind of on the line to see will I see these type of officers come to our school every year or like every 6 months. That goes hand in hand with resources. Do they have the resources to like show us or to give us every 6 months or every year? And for this to be kind of like a moderate sized county, who knows, right? Another strength that I'm really big on is the consistency with the OSHA or public health organizations. Okay, we're directly hand in hand with their regulations. So it gives the students a heads up of what to expect when they get out to the real world, excuse me, real world, as well as us as a professional, as a teacher. If we do want to like branch out of education, go direct into public health, we know what's expected of us. Another weakness is paperwork burden. I think another previous slide that we talked about a lot of accountability, a lot of documentation, audits that's required every year. And I'm sure they are requiring like a dissertation about everything that we had discussed at each lab. And it kind of gets burdensome when you have to, overlook a lab and then also make sure that you have everything copy down somewhere so that you can create that or put that in the audit for the yearly review. So that's a lot of stress as a professional. And these are just some kind of like an implementation roadmap for us to go by as we, continue to get better and continue to regulate ourselves as we continue on with the school year or school years. A really big thing that I like to incorporate or would like to see a lot more is training of staff as well as students. I would like to see lot more of the officers come to our schools and kind of like show their face, come train us as the teachers and professionals, as well as kind of like show the students what they're in for post grad. Right. There's other opportunities outside of science besides being a doctor, being a teacher. You could also be one of the enforcers. Oh, and so these are just the sources that I kind of use to like incorporate everything. Yeah, okay, well, that's all for me. Thank you for joining in.